Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tarnished Bronze. Patrick and I like to look at some comics that you might not have heard of or comics that you might not have dusted off your shelves for a long time. Now, Patrick, we have a treat today, and one of the queries that we're going to be continuing to sort of think of throughout this episode is, does humor belong in comics? So, can you tell us what we are getting into today?
Today, the masters behind the Legion of Superheroes in the mid and late 80s, Paul Levitz and Keith Giffen, are taking on the Legion of Substitute Heroes in the Legion of Substitute Heroes special from 1985. Now, I have to say that when this one came up, I actually thought for a moment until I started reading it that we were going to be doing DC Comics Presents number 59, which I think is from maybe 1983, and it stars Superman and the Legion of Substitute Heroes. With a special appearance by your favorite Ambush Bug. So we can do that one at some point. It's an excellent story, and actually, the one appearance by Ambush Bug that I will actually endorse because I'm not I'm not a huge fan, but I was wrong, and it's actually the Legion Special, which I had this one. I purchased it well after 1985. I don't think I had it back in the day, but it's a good story, and it's definitely very much full of comic relief, breaking of the fourth wall, the things that I typically associate with Keith Giffen and his kind of shtick. But Levitz is credited as the writer, but I think he got a big assist from Keith on this one because it definitely reads like his solo work on Ambush Bug and a lot of other things that I've read of his in terms of the variety of tongue in cheekness. But this is their second sort of treatment of the Legion of Substitute Heroes, and it is much like the first. If I don't, have you read the DC Comics Presents that I mentioned?
No, I haven't read that, although I'm a big fan of Ambush Bug, and I'm surprised that I don't actually own that one. So that's something that I'll have to delve into, and maybe we can dust it off for
If
perhaps an
you
April Fool's episode.
if you like this one, if you like this one, you'll like that one probably even better. In fact, I like this issue, but I actually think I like that one better too, to be honest. Like full disclosure, I think it's probably a little bit better. But same
Okay.
creative team,
Yeah.
and pretty much the same characters.
Yeah. And so we've gone through our history of Legion before
So to
and
set it
gone
up, I
through.
guess,
Is this was this the first Legion of Substitute Heroes that you read, or was that Ambush Bug Substitute Heroes one the first one that you read?
yeah. Well, I mean, I had the mini digests that had the Silver Age Legion tales, and some of those the substitute heroes will appear, in the last frame to save the Legion's bacon, and so there are several tales like that. So I was familiar with the Silver Age version of the substitute heroes. Now they change a little bit, so just like the main team. I think here on the cover you can see second from the left, Infectious Lass, and then there's Porcupine Pete next to her. Um, those two are relatively new additions. The other guys kind of make up the core team. I think Color Kid joined a little bit later as well. So I was familiar with them, but in terms of sort of modern interpretations of the team, it would be that 1983 DC Comics Presents, which I did have off the shelf. I think just because it was Legion related, to be honest. So I didn't know who the heck Ambush Bug was, but he's kind of he provides a good foil in that one with Superman, of course,
Mhm.
the straight laced Superman. And then we've got the fumbling Legion of Substitute Heroes, and then Ambush Bug just kind of hopping around like a green Bugs Bunny wreaking havoc. But that's a different issue. This issue, like I said, I didn't read until I was an adult. So
Well, we seem to have picked a good one, Patrick. So,
to set it
um,
up, I guess, give a little background in case you don't know. Oh, sorry.
yeah, no, we picked a good one. This is one of those periods where Keith Giffen is kind of in a transit phase of his career. He's done the Great Darkness saga and all of that great sci-fi stuff that we love. He's trying to get Ambush Bug up and off the ground, which is a very different style of cartooning. And when it comes to humor in comics, one of the things that you and I will readily admit is that the humor comics often, but not always, have a more cartoony, less rigorous style of art. Now, here it just so happens that one of the guns of the late 70s, early 80s is doing a humor book as an artist. So that's something that I found interesting as well. Like this is Keith Giffen is just incredibly versatile as an artist. He can do a Bernian shtick. He can do a Jack Kirby shtick. He's very versatile, and indeed probably got into trouble for hewing too closely to some cartoonists at some point. But yeah, always looks good, Keith Giffen. And this is kind of like a blend. This
I
is a
love this
blend
cover.
between the two styles.
I love this cover, and I actually think that Giffen's style in this is it's a bit of a departure from his art that he was producing at this time for Legion of Superheroes, the main team. But to me, it's a little reminiscent of a cleaned up, more colorful version of the work that he did in 5 years later.
Okay.
I didn't make that association until just now, but looking at some of the faces and the kind of, like you said, a little bit more free art style. Now, some of it harkens back to his work on the main title, but to me, I see where this to me seems more of a progression to 5 years later than the art in the main Legion book.
Okay, so if we're talking Windows and 5 years later is Windows 3.1, is this the crossover between DOS and Windows?
I mean, maybe so. Like I said, I hadn't really thought of that when I read it, but just sitting here now, I thought, especially some of the later faces, not necessarily this splash page. Excuse me. We see Prody here singing a folk song. Prody, for people who don't know, is a Chameleon Boy's pet. They decided retroactively to make them sentient, and so that threw a lot of wrenches into the works of the Silver Age stories. So that's something we may have never discussed that before, but that's another topic for another day.
Perhaps
So
best left untold. Captive sentient beings, Patrick.
yes, exactly. That are used as pets and props in a lot of different stories. Yeah. So anyway, that was a mess. But to give a little setup, and for people, you never know where people are coming in. The Legion of Substitute Heroes are a group of Legion rejects who either had powers that weren't helpful to the Legion,
Yeah.
or maybe couldn't control their powers well enough. They really wanted to be heroes so badly that they decided to band together under the leadership of Polar Boy. And then, as I said, sometimes during dire circumstances, they've actually been able to save the Legion from, these dire threats. And that was one of the tropes from the early Legion stories. The story of the underdog who makes good, the people who maybe are not appreciated as much as they should be, and are able to prove their worth eventually.
Yeah. So I came into this pretty blind, and I must admit, the first time I read it was in perhaps the first dozen or so issues of Legion I read. And then I read it after I'd read maybe 50, 60, 70 issues of Legion. It made a hell of a lot more sense. So some of the comments that I made originally on this when I read it the first time are sort of void, if you will, just because it all of these things contain a lore and a saga and a mythology, and Legion is particularly sort of obtuse with some of that. And so I actually liked it as a humor story the very first read, and then the second time I read it, I was like, oh, I know some of these characters now, and it made a lot more sense as a narrative as opposed to just the humor in it. So it's kind of like a
It
two for one. It's
leans
kind of a cool story and some fun. It's just people having fun as well, and we can give people that.
It really leans into what you're talking about, the mythos and the inside jokes and the Easter eggs. There's a lot. I think you may have seen some of the stuff in my notes where a lot of these are known characters, and we're playing on sort of questionable origins and rejects who didn't join the subs, and there's visual gags that if you unless you were a longtime reader, like you said, you would kind of just gloss over that and not necessarily understand how jam-packed this issue actually is, for people who are in the know.
Yeah, so you heard it here first on Tarnished Bronze. Patrick is in the know, and
I
I'm,
mean,
on the hanging out at the door with all the people who are just looking goggle-eyed into where all the cool people are hanging out. So I love, even when I didn't realize who all these characters were, I love the little introduction pages that they got. And I don't know who's narrating this. I think it might be mentioned in your notes somewhere, but I like the fact that this is kind of giving me one of those home video or one of those reality TV documentary styles of who are all these people. And then they run into one of them in the shower. And that's such a great, like, thing that you wouldn't like. Reality TV is with us now, but in 1984 or 5 or whenever this came out, this would have been a very like, oh, in the future, everyone will have documentary people follow them around. I kind of like this. It works on a few levels, and sometimes comics do predict the future. Now we can't live in a world where there's no cameras.
I sort of took it as the people who take bad pictures, stills,
Okay, yeah.
with old time cameras. I always my friends always give me a hard time because I'll line up the digital camera and I'll frame the picture just right, and then I'll click, and then they'll say, "Oh, let me see the pictures you took," and I'll say, "I only took one." You were standing there for like 3 seconds. I'm like, I grew up with real camera. Like I don't just click, 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 click.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, back in the day, these were the kind when you would take the picture to the place to get developed, sometimes you'd come up with this. People's heads cut off. You get the impromptu picture from the lady in the
And the
shower. Yeah, the
feet.
back of someone's head. So yeah,
Yeah, I
it's
think
cute.
that's the Legion of Superheroes headquarters, right? Not the Substitute Heroes, rather headquarters. And then I think they're all flying away, but the picture is like poorly
Hmm.
composed, so you get only a little bit of the rocket ship in the ground, and then only a little bit of the feet. And I think Giffen is using the 9 panel grid here to pretty good effect. This one's cropped, but yeah, it's surprising how early he uses that.
Hmm.
It'll almost become a rod around his, over, a millstone around his neck at some point. He has to draw all these panels, but apparently he did it to fill more story. And you definitely get a lot of story even with all these gags. And indeed, some of the visual gags, you need the panels because otherwise it would be 60, 70 pages if you did normal layouts, right? So, it's pretty economical and just great visual. I love these faces. I love this. This to me looks a lot like the world Judge Dredd inhabits with and these faces kind of look bizarre, but they look comic booky to me. I don't know if people in 1985 reading DC comics were necessarily ready for that, but to me it harkens back to the punk rock ethos of some of those early Judge Dredd issues where
Now
obviously the
this
artists were very talented, but they were doing something a bit non-mainstream.
This is where the some of the faces were beginning to make remind me of 5 years later for some
Okay.
reason. I don't know. It's been a while since like I said, it's been a while since I read that, but something about they're expressive, but they're minimalist a bit for
Yeah,
me.
yeah, 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 yeah. There's some. shorthand going on, but not shorthand in the sense of effort, shorthand in the sense that to sell an emotion or to sell
Yeah.
a vibe, we're giving them this. And I think we missed this is on Bismol. This is like, are we into the
Yeah, to
issue?
give a little bit of setup.
Yeah.
Yeah, to give a little bit of setup, Matter Eater Lad, who we see in the on the left panel in the red, I think that's red.
Hmm.
Um, he has returned home to his planet Bismol, where everyone has the ability to eat any form of matter or energy because everything on their planet was poisoned by radioactive microbes. So they've developed this talent of being able to eat anything. Uh, Earlier in the Legion, the main group, he was sent home to become a senator on his home planet. So that's how and honestly, I think that was a conceit to maybe get rid of a character whose power set made him seem maybe more suited for the subs than the main team, right? I mean, he's definitely a Silver Age character with kind of a goofy power and a silly name, but he has an army of loyal fans and in later volumes takes the lead, including 5 years later. I think he sort of plays a more of a key role, and then in other volumes and reboots of the Legion, he sort of always comes up. A lot of people really love Matter Eater Lad, and I'm a fan. I like him well enough. I actually kind of like his old costume when he was in the Silver Age, but nevertheless, the people of Bismol have decided to switch to a computer-based economy. So they've shipped in these
Sound familiar?
old-timey Silver Age-looking computers. Yes, old-timey Silver Age-based computers, and longtime readers will immediately recognize it as the old-school computo. Of course, the maniacal AI that Brainiac 5 built in the 60s that took over the earth and also killed one of Triplicate Girl's
Yeah.
bodies. So this is a murderous robot that Matter Eater Lad immediately recognizes and knows there's trouble. He can't get a hold of the main team, so he sends for the substitute heroes, and people immediately question the wisdom in that act. So, and of course, chaos ensues from there.
And so, Patrick, this is something that we have a lot of followers in the tech world and massive viewership in the tech world. So maybe they can use this as perhaps a guidebook, or a warning as to whether we want to have computer overlords or just people overlords. And personally, I'd rather the devil I know. Now, one of my first ever Substitute Heroes issues was some Secret Origin that was a split book with Dr. Light and the Substitute Heroes. And Chlorophyll Kid, is this Chlorophyll Kid?
It is.
Okay, because this, when I bought it at 10 years old, was unfathomably complicated. I didn't even know who the Legion of Superheroes were, let alone the Legion of Substitute Heroes. So it's great for me to finally put names to faces, which are just in the ether of my comic book memory. And
Oh,
yeah,
can I just interject and say you would love Chlorophyll Kid because he has pouches?
yeah, no, so I was like, I always,
Is that where
because
you were
this,
going?
yeah, and I was like, this
Oh,
is the only guy I could kind of be like, why does he have all those, the utility belt? Um, uh, it always seems
because he
so
carries
peculiar.
seeds.
Yeah, yeah, and then yeah, okay, so that makes a lot of sense. Practical, utilitarian, looks cool, could hang out with Cable. Like that's all you want in a character. Um and is Polar Boy always got this haircut, or is this the first time we see him with the Keith Giffen hair?
Yeah, what they've changed him because he used to wear I think you all call it a beanie, but we call
Yeah.
it toboggan,
Okay.
right? It was a sort of a yeah, it was kind of modified, right? But it was part of his outfit, and had kind of a, if I recall, a white fringe, and that was kind of his normal look. So this is yeah, from my memory, I think this is when he first started being seen without his toboggan. Now, Polar Boy, spoiler alert, from 40 years ago, will eventually become a member after many, many decades of trying. He'll become a member of the team. Now, when he's inducted into the Legion, he has a different look, another different look, which is sort of a kind of a 80s dynasty large shoulder pad, and he
Oh,
has the head covering again.
yeah, yeah.
Um, this was a very brief time, very brief window when he was showing this sort of icicle hair.
And it's meant to be a spaceship, but it looks a bit like a dirigible. So that's all you need to know about
Yes.
how much money the substitute heroes get to spend on their transit. Once this like
Oh,
yeah,
another Easter egg that you may not have gotten, with all due respect. If you go back to the splash page, you'll see a series of caves. And before the Legion moved out of their rocket ship headquarters, and the substitute sort of inherited that as a hand-me-down, the Legion of Substitute Heroes met in the Justice League's old cave headquarters that was, I think, in Happy Harbor. God, I can't remember, if maybe Rhode Island or somewhere in the days of Snapper Carr and all this, right?
okay.
So that's where the Legion of Substitute Heroes originally had their headquarters.
Well, you just we are
And that's
learning
why it
here today.
says,
And
that's
you
why those caves are there. I mean, did I blow your mind?
yeah, I just thought this was just got to fill a panel up. So that's yeah,
Yeah.
um, really cool.
And it says they built the cave, but my memory is that they actually went to the Justice League, the old Justice League cave.
Okay. Well, that makes sense because they're really into the legacy kind of thing of having the substitutes and following in the footsteps of others. Now, what I was going to get at here is what do you think about Gigi Cusimano? What are your thoughts on the character?
Um, I think I think the most interesting thing of that for her was when she sort of has an aborted tryst with Sunboy, and there's all kinds of little soap opera drama in the main book that happens from that. So that's my biggest memory of her. But yeah, she's really put out by having to sort of hang out and keep an eye on the subs. And this is definitely desk duty for
Yeah.
that cop who wants to be, rounding up the bad guys. So she's definitely pulled, the short straw and is on desk duty, as they say. Now, also on this panel, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that Color Kid is normally a male character.
Okay.
But in this story, we find out later that Infectious Lass has actually infected Color Kid and several other people with Grandin gender reversal germs that causes them to swap genders. Which is just crazy that this is written in 1985 to me. It seems a bit prescient, and I mean that's all I'm going to say about it. But I was fascinated when I reread it. I had forgotten that aspect of the story.
Yeah,
So,
and the
in
interesting
fact, on the cover, Color Kid
yeah.
is his normal sort of male gendered self.
Yeah, so what I like is everyone just takes it in stride. And maybe we could all learn a
Well,
lesson
except
from
for
it.
Polar Boy. Polar Boy is not super happy, but not because it was because Color Kid didn't choose this, right? This is
Yeah,
non-consensual gender
I
swapping that was
guess so.
happening.
Yeah.
This wasn't something that, yeah, that he felt like he needed. But I think he makes a lovely woman, and he's actually that I really actually always had a thing for this character. Being a young kid, I love the sort of rainbow motif of him and his kind of weird crew cut hairdo. And I loved him
The
as a woman. I thought it
the
was great.
pseudo Wolverine hair, it looks like.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, so I just wanted your thoughts on those two characters because well, that plays a big role in sort of this subplot with the gender swapping and so forth. But Gigi is a big has a is a major supporting character in the main book. And we
Yes.
didn't see her featured on some of the other Legion episodes. Now this is a hell of a look. These are our villains, right? These are the villains of the piece. And are these actual rejects from the substitute heroes? That's what I kind of got
No,
in.
these are Legion rejects from the 60s. This is Tusker on the left there. He has the tusks that can grow. And then Eiffel Ethel, who has tons of eyeballs. I can't remember if the eyeballs can do anything special or not, to be honest. But no, they were minor Legion rejects in the 60s, in the Silver Age, and they chose not to join the Legion of Substitute Heroes. Now, some of these characters, like these two, were actually recycled again during Jeff Johns' run on the Legion when I think I referred to this in an earlier podcast. Um, there's a story where Earthman, who's also a Legion
Oh,
reject,
okay.
sort of takes over the planet. Earth is overrun by xenophobia, and they want all the aliens off the planet. And he kind of takes over with a new version of the Justice League. Um, um, I can't remember what they bastardized the Justice League name in some way, and he uses a lot of these evil Legion rejects. So some of the Legion rejects just disappear. Some of them join the good guys, the substitute heroes, and some of them end up on the bad guys team. I think Radiation Roy comes to mind. There was another one named Ron Carr, who's actually referred to in this. Actually, maybe in this panel, but Ron Carr apparently is has somehow given these villains their chance to get into the Legion of Supervillains. All they need to do is go to Bismol and sabotage these new computers, and they don't really know what they're getting into.
Yeah, that seems they're gonna bite off
By the
more
way,
than
in Interlac, the bottom panel says brush after every meal.
okay. That's great advice.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I thought this was a great blend of the new and the old style. And just going back, what I like about Giffen's tech is it's curved. It's not sharp edges. So if you look at Apple products, they're all curved. So, the curve is the edge of the future. All of Giffen's tech, even in his like space opera heyday, and even in the future, in a few years later when he does some more Legion, all of the tech is curved, and that's I think part of his special sauce in making it look real cool is it doesn't have straight lines. And you notice too, like when we break out of these panels, it's kind of has a really big impact. And it's getting almost like Frank Miller territory, the art here, like almost black and white to the abstraction of the figure. But I thought this was very good because it's jam-packed with panels. We get a lot of story. We get all of these in jokes and Easter eggs that I have no clue of, but you're illustrating them to me and the listeners as well. There's a lot going on in this issue for essentially like a throwaway special, Patrick. Would you sort of agree with
Yeah, a
that?
lot of effort.
Yeah, like
Oh
yeah,
yeah, definitely, definitely a lot of effort, and like I said, even rereading it, I think there were things that I picked up on that maybe I just kind of glossed over because, as you said, it works on two different levels. It works just as a farce and just kind of a ridiculous tale that's sort of funny and definitely in the Keith Giffen mode of humor for me, especially having read the Ambush Bug series relatively recently. It just really smacks of his humor. In fact, I had to look again. I was like, did Levitz write this?
yeah,
Because I really feel like they gave Keith a very wide berth on this, and I think that probably he probably even helped write the actual words and stuff. Just saying because it just reads so much like one of his comics. But like I said, having reread it, there are so many in jokes. So this is Pulsar Stargrave. Um, there is a lot of, and to be honest, I didn't go back and do the research, but there's been tons of contradicting origin stories of Pulsar Stargrave that I think have tried to be reconciled at some point by probably people like Levitz. I don't know how successful they've been at that. I don't know if DC has ever even come down with a concrete origin story of him, but he's been everything from a computer to a Kaluuyan to a relative of Brainiac to maybe he
Oh,
was the future version of Superman's Brainiac to like he's been everything. That's an exaggeration. So people who know Legion as well or better than me will maybe take issue with that, but I'm trying to illustrate a point. So you'll see in this, he gives sort of contradicting information about himself in certain places. He's been resurrected. When Matter Eater Lad later bites his nose off to spite his face, and we see computer machinery underneath his nose. So then we're like, oh, he's a robot. But I feel at some point maybe he contradicts that. So they're definitely playing with things on an editorial level that deep fans would understand, but that even probably in the publication offices, maybe they laugh about, in my opinion.
and there's some notes from Karen Berger, who will go on to make the Vertigo line, and she's the
Mm.
Legion of Superheroes person for a long, the editor for a long time. And you know, there's a whole page where it just has the editorial, like we can't show this. This is just even too nuts to
Or the one where they say there's a convenient plot device that allows them to get to the planet's surface,
yeah, yeah, just
which was cute.
but like again, they're putting the work in. This, how many panels are here, Patrick? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10,
Yeah.
11, 12, 13 panels in the page. A lot of it is repeated on the bottom, but you've still got to come up with it. There's some, you know, so we might be getting sold short on seriousness, but we're not getting sold short on craft. And just some Polar Boy is going to exhibit more of this frustration when he becomes a member, and then later the spoiler leader of the, I was going to say the Teen Titans, leader of the Legion of Superheroes. Um, and so some people said, "Oh, that was a very out of character." In this is in the letters column of these issues. Oh, that's very out of character for Polar Boy to sort of be so self-centered and so on and so forth. After reading this, I
Mm.
don't think so. I think he is
No, no,
self-centered.
no, no,
He
no.
might be
In
heroic,
fact,
yeah, but
yeah,
self-centered.
in fact, I hadn't read the letters column and I didn't know what you were going to say because I just skipped that. But I was actually going to say when you were talking about there's no shortage of effort and craft, that they're actually being true to the character. They're actually being true to the characterization of the characters, even in the midst of this farce that's so ridiculous, that has so many jokes and so much editorializing and breaking of the fourth wall. The reason Polar Boy would be so upset is because he takes being a hero very seriously. So as the substitutes, fumble over themselves and give this Keystone Cops like performance of not even being able to get to the surface of Bismol, Polar Boy is taking this very seriously because he's the leader of the group. He's someone who still has ambition to get into the Legion, and it's not a joke to him. When I was reading this, I thought it made complete sense for him to be frustrated. He's frustrated by the gender swapping, again, not because he's a bigot, but because he's somebody who wants this to work out right, not have infectious lass completely out of control of her power and switching everybody's gender on the space station and et cetera, et cetera. So I actually think it makes a lot of sense. Polar Boy has always been a very, maybe even an overly serious character. Even back in the Silver Age, he was somebody who, I mean, he's the one who came up with the idea of the substitute heroes and has been essential in saving the Legion. And in fact, I feel that sort of making him a full-time member eventually in the 80s was may have been even, I mean, maybe Levitz felt like this, but I know the fans probably felt like this character was deserved to get his due, right? He deserved it.
Yeah. And I'm specifically referring to, I think, the trial of Brainiac, where I could understand this guy is a stickler. This guy is a stickler for things being
Exactly.
correct. Yeah, so here's an example of just some of the off the wall stuff that is getting thrown at the reader, but not cheap stuff thrown at. It's very difficult to letter and then draw a thing that is recognizable within the lettering. It's not easy. Just ask Frank Miller, who knows a thing or two about making comics. It's very difficult to make a panel inside a sound effect or a wording, the block lettering. That is not an easy feat to do. So like I said, even though this was a bit of a departure from, say, the art on the Great Darkness saga, for example, I don't feel I was being shortchanged. In fact, it was a nice like palette cleanser to get something that's a little bit different, and it hits a lot better because it's not quite as long as, say, an ambush bug miniseries, which is maybe where you're stretching the joke a bit thin. This has a lot of characters. We can do a lot of different things. And so Patrick, I think you're pretty much right on the nail where we're getting a lot of value here. The things that you dislike about humor in comics aren't wagging the dog. So it's not the tail wagging
Hmm.
the dog here. It just happens that we have some moments of levity. As well as just some. This is very
Yeah,
strange.
the humor is part is I was just gonna say the humor is part of the story instead of the story being incidental to
Yeah.
the humor.
Um.
Also, if you go back one, sorry, before
Oh
you
yeah.
change, you know the things that I mentioned about Pulsar Stargrave and his origins. Here you see him say, I am what I am.
Oh
Let
yeah.
no man
Yeah.
or machine ever comprehend all that I am, or they will surely perish. This is Levitz specifically calling out the fact that DC doesn't even know what this character is. And that, like I said, for someone like me, when I read that, I'm like, oh, that's perfect. Also, I do want to mention too, I've always loved this version of Matter Eater Lad. I love the costume. I love the green and yellow. Just
It,
had to mention that just
it
because I saw it.
works.
So, but please continue with the
Works.
next. I
No.
didn't mean to
Works.
interrupt,
Works
but
so well. And then I just was doing some digging, and Brainiac is like an android and a Coolian. Coolian.
yeah, Kaluan?
Kaluan, like the drink. So he is a Kaluan and an android, depending on the time and depending on the state of editorial. So I can understand how someone who is a derivative or a suggested or implied derivative of the OG Brainiac could have an identity crisis like this. It makes it fun to me. I'm not a continuity cop. I just take it as it comes. And I would love for someone to delve into this guy a bit more. And here's the panel that you were saying where he has the machinery behind his nose. Now this is a mainstream comic with a mainstream artist published by a mainstream publisher on a mainstream newsstand. There's nothing mainstream about this full page figure. It looks like something that could be out of Sin City. Um, just I think people give Keith Giffen short shrift on his art because he does so much of the plotting and the layouts later on. I mean, he had the misfortune of having to lay out all of the issues of 52, which is that weekly series that DC did in like the mid 2000s or something. Like, and everyone thought, oh, all he can do is the little thumbnails and like what panel goes where, and all he does is the grid. Like this guy could do anything. He could make something look like as good as one of the issues with John Byrne's Uncanny X-Men. He can make something look as like abstract as a black and white Frank Miller image. This guy is so versatile, and if given the material like this, he can just do what he wants. I kind of find it very funny and very bizarre that he's not up there in the pantheon of the greats. Like, because name someone else who can do all of these styles, but do them convincingly. And we may or may not get into Ambush Bug on this podcast, but he can do a Ditko riff. Like he can make something look like Archie comics or Casper the Friendly Ghost. It might not be to your taste, but it's just what a secret weapon DC had for all those years, Patrick. Like just the
Well, and like
creativity of this guy.
you're always fond of saying about certain panels, I mean, this is art, right? This is something you can print out and put on your wall. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily have this on my wall, but this is art. I mean,
Yeah,
this is an incredible panel. It's very evocative, which we both love. It tells a story. And it's very different, and it's different for Giffen, but also harkens back to him too. You can kind of tell that he's the artist, but it's a departure from his normal style. And I will say, and we've had this discussion before. I love Keith Giffen, and most of his art I love, but there are certain periods in styles that he did that weren't my favorite. 5 years later is not parts of 5 years later aren't really my favorite. I think some of the faces get a little trolly.
yeah,
But then there are other things that he does. When he returned to the Legion of Superheroes, he went to a very kind of square, Kirby-esque kind of style that a lot of people didn't like that I absolutely loved and liked better than Kirby. Don't, sorry.
yeah.
But
Because
it's just a
yeah,
modern version. Now, my favorite Keith Giffen is what he was doing in the Legion of Superheroes at this time, which is just more clean. I have a bias towards that, but it's exactly what you said. Super versatile, but there's also sort of a bit of a through line. I think when you're familiar with his art, you can see kind of that it's him, even though it's totally different, which is kind of interesting too. Do you know what I mean?
yeah, yeah. And I think that's why you have a 40-year career because it's always you. Once
Yeah.
you chase a trend,
Yeah,
then
yeah.
you're always chasing something that was cool. If you're doing yourself, like you'll be fine. So I think that's a
I
lesson.
always think of him as being so versatile. I don't feel like, I mean, you understand art by making comparisons, but I
Yeah,
don't know necessarily that that's how he was creating his art. I don't know this, of course, but to me, I always look at him as an artist that was developing, and whether he was developing skill wise or developing based on being bored and changing his style, he's almost like a Picasso to me. Like,
yeah,
oh, this is his blue period, this is
yeah, yeah,
his
yeah.
whatever, and because he kind of it seemed to go from period to period, but then also maybe could switch it up, right? Because some of the stuff that we saw in Invasion was not like was was that before? I guess that was before 5 years later. I was going to say that it was.
No, but it's right when that is about to come out. So it's fair to say that that was like a trip down memory lane for him.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah. So
Yeah,
he has full control of his craft, even though he's making these artistic choices of what sort of style he wants to draw in. But he seems to be able to switch back and forth and go to whatever he wants. I mean, and I guess if you're, somebody who's a great penciler, maybe you should be able to do that, I guess, but we don't see it that often, right? People get stuck in their style, and
or
that's kind of who they
they
are.
become a prisoner of their success.
Yeah.
And Keith Giffen is no one's prisoner. And just to illustrate, here's like the classic old school sci-fi stuff, but just with the new school figures in the panel. And I'm totally lost as to where we are in the story, but it says it's part two, so I'm going to take it at its word. And are they on Bismol yet, or just above? They're just above. They
This is
haven't.
when they're on the ship above Bismol and they're not
Yeah,
able to get to the planet for various reasons. This
yeah.
is when editorial, just kind of cuts to them all getting to the planet. Let me say something about this, and you're usually the art expert, and I have no problem with that. I'm more like this is what I like, this is what I don't like. This is very evocative of his work on the main title
Hmm.
in terms of the technology and the world building, which he created. He's the one that really brought the Legion into this sort of style that stuck after he left. But even though it looks like something that would be in the main series, there's something subtle about the drawing that makes the drawing itself comedic. Do you see what I'm saying? I don't know in the curve of the planet, in the rotund shape of the satellite. There's something about it that just the drawing itself, even though it looks like the technology that he set up for the 30th or the 31st century, I guess it's the
Yeah.
30th century at this point. Uh, but that there's a subtle comic relief that's even in the drawing itself, or am I reading too much into that? Do you
I
see
don't
that?
think so. I think this is meant to look like Polar Boy's hat. The sh
It does look like Polar Boy's old hat. Oh no. I'm going to go with my explanation though, because I think that's quite profound. That you can subtly draw just some stupid spaceship that looks like the spaceship styles that you have in a serious comic, but you can somehow draw it so the spaceship itself looks a little off and kind of funny, but not
yeah,
in a wrong way. I don't
it's
know.
tall. It's too tall for how long it is. It kind of does that, it's a little bit C grade. Like we don't have the Mercedes-Benz spaceship. We're going to give you this sort of crap one.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Not the
that's
not
yeah.
Yeah. And more yelling, more arguing. Polar Boy's like lost his composure, Patrick. He's lost
If you've ever been in charge of a team like this, you would completely commiserate with him.
yeah,
So,
he's
yeah.
just about ready to capitulate here, I think. Yeah, just it's a
I mean,
very
he's even
fun
turned colors on the bottom
eh,
in the
oh,
bottom panel.
yeah, he's overheating. And we get to the sort of climax of the story, and I forget what this guy's Stone Boy, who is probably, to be
Yes.
fair, no one's favorite Legionnaire. Um, but he is
Do you want trivia about Stone Boy? Is that in one Silver Age tale, they have a competition and they're going to let the winner of the competition become a full member of the Legion. The competition is among the substitute heroes, probably because they've saved the Legion at some point. And Stone Boy is actually the one who wins the competition and is allowed to become a full Legionnaire, and he turns him down to stay with his friends in the subs, foregoing what they all want more than anything. And that, my friend, is why Stoneboy actually is some people's favorite Legionnaire
yeah,
or non-Legionnaire.
that is the ethos of the Legion. It's friendship first, Legion second, right?
Yep.
So yeah, I didn't know
He
that. So
turns him
that's
down.
yeah, good on him. Um,
Also, Stoneboy, just so that you know a little bit more about this character, because this is we're in my wheelhouse now.
okay,
Stoneboy's from a planet where it's night half the year and day the other half, I think. And
okay.
so his people have developed the ability to turn to stone so they can hibernate for half the year.
Okay, that does make sense.
So that's
That's a good in-universe reason as to why we have these powers. And I'm just showing these pages because I do like these character vignettes. So at the end of this issue, we kind of get an update on where all of our characters all stand. And these were quite fun and sort of illuminating because when I first read this, I was like, I don't know what the hell I read. And then you get to these last 6, 7, 8 pages, and it does sort of like a capstone of all of the substitute heroes and so on in each of these characters that are in this issue. And I kind of like this was the thing that I was a bit wishy-washy on the story, but this is the thing that really grabbed my attention. And so I just thought I'd highlight some of these. And they're not necessarily highfalutin character moments, they're just little insights into each character. And I'm not sure if I like it didn't illuminate necessarily the story, but the core of the Legion is the characters and their interactions. And this is like just some beautiful stuff, getting at what makes the individuals tick. And so a couple of these, Gigi's one is also really good. Like I can understand this is like a good comedy as well. These little ending vignettes were something which other people would have thrown away. Like they really put some effort into this, and it makes sense, and it kind of does sort of you get a payoff here in this issue, Patrick. So do you have a favorite of these kind of like rundowns at the end? Just going to go through a few as we.
Um, I really love this fish creature.
Oh,
I
okay.
love that one.
Yeah.
I think it was super appropriate that Polar Boy happened to see this is just for the readers or listeners. Each when they couldn't get down to the planet, they all somehow ended up being teleported separately. So they all, as you say, fall into various sort of perilous situations as they find themselves isolated and alone on the planet in different places. So, like you see here, Gigi ends up in the ocean about to get eaten by a fish. I think probably the one I think is most appropriate is that Polar Boy sort of ends up somewhat in the right place at maybe the wrong time, so that he gets to sort of help fight Pulsar Stargrave because he's the serious, he's the straight man in the picture, as they might say. But I actually did love Color Kid being able to
Yeah.
use her powers in a unique way to kind of illuminate the incendiary trash heap that she ended up in. So yeah, no, they were very cute.
And then we have, I also think that out of Dark Knight Returns with the TVs, you know how they have the, I don't know if you've read it. Anyway, it basically has Frank Miller does this motif of where he does a television screen and then you can catch up on the news in the world, which illustrates things that you don't want to really have to draw or explain.
Mhm.
I think that definitely they do that in Invasion to a terrible extent where it basically wastes like 8 pages doing all this stuff about issues that we haven't read and don't care about. Whereas here, I feel like these kind of interviews are really fun, and you get that thing where like this is the PR of the Legion, but we've been reading
Mhm.
the real story of the Legion. I felt this was a fun little way in which to
And
get that
also
got across.
such a huge joke that to me is quintessential Giffen is that we have all, pages, what are we on, 37?
Yeah,
So we've had 36 pages of setup and shenanigans and chaos and fighting and this and that and yelling and getting down to the planet. And everything is wrapped off panel
hmm
on
but with
purpose,
this,
not because he didn't want to draw it, not because they ran out of pages. 100% as part of the joke is we're not even going to show you what happens. We're just going to have somebody tell you at the end. You're going to see a diagram. It's
yeah,
not even it really happening, and just see the aftermath of seeing Pulsar Stargrave like ripped in half. But which I love, that panel's amazing. He's like, just in case you thought I couldn't draw this, I absolutely can. But I had forgotten when I reread it, like the fact that at the end, because we see this in comic books so much. I feel like that's part of the joke, right? Is I
yeah,
say this all the time. We build, we create a world, we have all the MacGuffins, everything happens, and then they kind of run out of pages, they run out of ideas, and in the last moment, it was all a dream, or it's wrapped up in one page, just a Deus ex machina or whatever,
yeah.
So in this case, I feel like they're really taking the piss out of it, and to me, this is just something that straight from the brain of Keith Giffen. To me, just
Yeah,
like we
and
wrap this up off panel, it's already over. This is what happened. Bye.
I think the major difference is we don't feel cheated as readers.
No,
Like that's the key
no.
here, I think, Patrick. And that was going to be my one little query. I think this isn't, solid gold or solid diamonds, but this is for what it is a special issue. It's really great. I think it's a great link between some of the overtly funny stuff that Keith Giffen does and some of the stuff that happens to have humor in it. Later on, he'll do some humor with Ambush Bug. Later on, he'll do some humor laying out the Justice League International stuff, which is meant to be funny. I think the Justice League International stuff is where he perfects how I do this in the panels. Whereas Ambush Bug, it's too normal comic book, and so the jokes don't land where they would land necessarily in a cartoon that you're reading on a newspaper. I think by the time he does JLI, he has the boxes in the right place, the panels in the right place, the jokes in the right place, um, which makes it
I think
less.
Ambush Bug is too pushed. The joke is too pushed by the words instead of the visuals. Is
Yeah,
that
yeah.
fair? Do you
And
know?
there's some
And that
great
makes it a
when
bit
it
more
connects.
tedious.
When it connects, it's genius, but when it doesn't connect, it just seems to be meandering. Um, and so I know that you don't like humor in comics, but this is a comic that just
Oh, so
happened to
much.
be funny, Patrick, as opposed to one that was trying too hard to be clever. Is that? And
Yeah, no, I think that's 100% fair. I did enjoy this. And you're exactly right. When it's done right, it hits. And we'll get to Ambush Bug. You said maybe, but we'll get there. I think I liked a lot of the things that he had to say, and I did like the jokes, but I think you put your finger on it. It's a little bit too dependent on the reading, so it comes across as a bit ham-fisted
yeah,
instead of just sort of being organically funny. I think also it's a little bit easier. Two things. One is, like you said, the cast of characters as opposed to the one character
yeah,
that makes the shtick become a little bit repetitive, seemingly, at least visually, even if it's not, in terms of the
so good.
script.
Yeah, I get that.
Also,
Imagine.
oh, when you have a particular love for the property, then that makes everything a little bit more palatable. So,
So I think, Patrick, maybe that the Legion of Substitute Heroes is like Monty Python,
hmm.
and Ambush Bug is maybe John Cleese. Like, if you like John Cleese, you'll like Ambush Bug. But if you like Monty Python, you may not like John Cleese by himself.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
I think that's one, that's just come to me now, and I kind of feel that the ensemble cast, you can do different things, whereas if you have the sole character, you're kind of forced to work within that box.
And
And
he
that,
has his ambush bug has his shtick. He has his personality, right? So it's 18 pages of being hit over the head with that shtick. And that if you don't love that, then that can be a little tedious. Whereas here we have different characters to kind of play off of, right? Mad Reader Lad has always been somebody who is a bit funny and right. And the writers know that he's a bit of a ridiculous character. But in this, he's more of one of the serious characters, right? And then we have Polar Boy, who's the complete serious character. And then the varying levels of idiocy from the other team members. Color Kid's not fumbling. He's
no,
just been infected and gender swapped, but he's just a regular, he's also sort of a
competent.
straight man.
Yeah,
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 relatively competent. So I wonder if maybe Ambush Bug suffers from that, the lack of having a sort of a straight man to play off of a little bit.
yeah. And so, Patrick, will this be the last Keith Giffen that we look at on the channel?
Oh, please, no, absolutely not. And it probably won't be the last subs because we have to do DC Comics Presents. What did I say? 2059.
59. Yeah.
Have to do it. I don't know why I said 26. Oh, that'll be something we'll talk about offline.
All right. Well, you heard it here first. Some secret plans for Tarnished Bronze for the new year. And so if you enjoy this, like, follow, subscribe. We have a load of videos on the channel. Patrick and I will be coming to you with a new episode very shortly. So stay tuned.